Getting to the heart of the matter. Back to Guy, Ben, and Frank with more Inside the News.
Welcome back to our third segment of Inside the News, and we've termed this our election trail segment. We're glad that you are with us. Frank Vernuccio, Guy Wehman, and Ben Brunson's down in the bottom middle if you're watching us on YouTube or AUN TV. Okay, Frank, let's get to you right now. And we were just talking a little bit off the air, and just go ahead and kind of share with our audience what's going on.
Well, the biggest debate among wonks is whether or not Joe Biden is actually going to debate Donald Trump. There's little doubt that he could not hold his own. He would probably wind up looking completely foolish. He hasn't been able to hold a cognizant thought, even with relatively scripted press interviews right now. So how do the Democrats get out of allowing Joe Biden to disgrace himself in a public debate with Donald Trump? We're already hearing some of the preliminary ideas. Donald Trump is such a bad guy and has such terrible ideas. We don't want to give him a platform for spreading those terrible ideas even further. Donald Trump doesn't like Black Lives Matter. Therefore, we're not going to encourage racism by allowing him a platform to talk about his point of view. The Democrats desperately have to avoid Joe Biden getting onto that stage with Donald Trump. Indeed, it's not just getting on a stage with Donald Trump. It's confronting the public or the media at all. The campaign that Joe Biden has run from the basement has been a godsend to the Democratic Party because anything more would expose how incompetent and incapable of holding the office of President of the United States Joe Biden actually is.
You know, this is going to work against him either way here, Ben. If Biden does go to the debates, and I'd be salivating to watch those. I think it'd be absolutely fascinating because I think Donald Trump would clean the floor with Joe Biden. I maybe shouldn't say it like that, but at the same time, if Biden hides and does not go in, that once again is another piece of ammunition for the GOP and the Donald Trump campaign as well, Ben.
Yeah, my bet is that they will find an excuse not to have a debate. I find it interesting that Notre Dame, which was scheduled to be the host for the first debate, has pulled out. And don't be surprised if they find it difficult to ever find a new host for a debate as they go from venue to venue and they decide to pull out because of whatever reason. COVID-19 will be cited, of course, for it. But the fact is that keeping Joe Biden in the basement has helped. And the polls reflect that. And keeping him away from the American people, having pre-recorded messages and sound bites released has been the way to go. Having proxies really on the campaign trail on his behalf instead of Joe Biden, it's going to work. This reminds me a lot of a prior election. It reminds me of 1988. And at this same point in 1988, the polling, and that was going to be George Bush the senior versus Michael Dukakis. And remember, George Bush was the vice president under Ronald Reagan, running for president to replace Ronald Reagan in 88, running against Michael Dukakis, a Northeast liberal, a Massachusetts liberal. At this point in the polling, Dukakis had a 55% approval rating, and George Bush was at 35%. He was being destroyed by Dukakis in the polls. And it was the same issue. The people really didn't know Dukakis. And once they started debating, and George Bush killed Dukakis in the debates and on the issues. So the lesson from that was if they'd kept Dukakis hidden away, they might have had a chance. In the end, George Bush took 40 of 50 states. It was an electoral landslide victory. I think it's not going to be an electoral landslide, but I think Trump will be reelected. But the challenge for the Democrats is how do they keep Joe Biden from revealing his dementia? And that's what he has. There are moments when he can argue successfully. He's had some appearances where he's coherent, but then again, there are moments where he goes completely off the rails, and it is very clear that he has early onset dementia, and they have to avoid that outcome.
You know, we started talking about this early onset Joe, as we called him, about a year ago, and then about 8 months ago, 12 months ago, and what has happened here is that we are seeing the narrative come about that pretty much everybody's talking about that. Even some of the mainstream media, they might say a little bit, but then they'll get away from it very quickly here, Frank. But it is true that he just does not carry himself well. And you've got to hand it to Jill Biden, because she can stay next to him and all of his press events and everything that he does, and kind of subtly coach him behind the scenes.
Well, it kind of reveals an interesting fact in American politics, and it applies perhaps somewhat more to the Democratic Party than it does to the Republican Party. There is a loyalty, a brand loyalty to the Democratic Party that does not exist for the Republican Party. You could put a combination of Adolf Hitler and Mickey Mouse on a Democratic line in many parts of the United States, and people would go to the polls and vote not for the candidate, but for the political party. The Republicans have never had quite that element of brand loyalty. I would say going into national elections, if you look at the results in the polling, about 45% of the electorate are going to vote for the Democratic candidate no matter who he is. That might only be true for about 25% of the Republican electorate. That 20% margin going right into an election is a huge handicap favoring the Democrats. That's what they're counting on this time, that it doesn't really matter who the candidate is, that brand loyalty to the Democratic Party will prevail. Now, you're seeing this particularly true in some of this nation's largest cities. There has been no city mismanaged more dramatically than the cities of Chicago or New York. There is absolutely no logical reason why any person of any color or any ideological persuasion would vote for the mayor of Chicago or the mayor of New York City. They've done a terrible job, no matter what your beliefs are, no matter who you are. Yet, and certainly in the case of New York, after Mayor de Blasio has done conceivably the worst job of any mayor in the history of New York, and there have been some real losers there, he nevertheless got reelected. Not reelected as an individual, but simply because he's a Democrat and commanded the loyalty of Democrat Party voters.
You know, we have seen horrific views coming out of New York City with these freezer trucks full of dead bodies with this COVID business. And it's just terrible, the mismanagement of de Blasio. All right, very quickly here, Ben, before we get going on here, indictments possible from Durham?
They're possible, yes. One would assume that there are a number of indictments pending. Why they haven't occurred already is anyone's guess. It's not a good sign. I hear blame being given to COVID-19 and the inability to seat a grand jury in Connecticut as a result. My response to that is, okay, let's find a prosecutor in Texas or Florida or someplace where they're open for business, and let's get going. We know the facts. More keeps getting leaked out. It is absolutely disastrous for the Democratic narrative, because what we've learned is that any pretense that there was any shred of validity to the Russia hoax is gone. This was a premeditated hoax from the beginning, an attempt to first, obviously, an excuse to get FISA warrants to spy, allow the NSA to spy on the Trump campaign and on Donald Trump, and then an attempt to bring down the campaign and shoot them down.
All right, we've got to take a time out. We're going to be back, and we've talked about this subject before, the EMP. Oh my goodness, it is real, and China's on the warpath. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.